Hello, my name is Marie. Today I will tell you about Sumerian cities, the first mega cities in the world. In Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and the Euphrates, sometimes during the 4th millennium BC, that is a very long time ago, people started to gather in cities. They soon became huge centers, covering hundreds of hectares in some cases, protected by high, impressive walls and inhabited by thousands of people. At this time, Mesopotamian cities were the largest settlements in the ancient world, long before Greek and Roman cities. Their inhabitants, the Sumerian, had to invent a new city way of life. So, what was it like to live in a Sumerian city in the 3rd millennium BC? In this video and the 3 following ones, I hope to give you some answers to this question. But it will probably raise many more, and maybe we will get even more curious about this fascinating civilization in the end. Before focusing on life conditions proper in video 3 and 4, I will tell you a few words about the origins of those cities in this video and about their main features in the second video. So let's start our travel in time. Southern Mesopotamia is almost a desert today. It is a very warm and arid country, but in Sumerian times the country looked very different. Level of the sea was much higher than it is today. Cities like Ur and Lagash were seaports, as you can see on the map. Euphrates and Tigris rivers merged into a vast marshland. First cities like Eridu were probably built on turtle backs in the middle of the marshes, which extended in the north up to the city of Uruk, maybe even to the city of Nippur. Sumer was like a small paradise in the marshes, and Sumerians' everyday life relied a lot on the resources from there. For millennia, inhabitants of southern Mesopotamia lived in small settlements of no more than a few dozens of hectares, in the steppe or in the marshes. But suddenly, it was probably more progressive than that, they started to gather in sites that covered hundreds of hectares, notably in the city of Uruk. Why? Scholars have suggested many explanations, and it does remain a question and a debate. The most common explanation puts forward both climate and environmental reasons. Most probably, there is a mix of several causes. To put it in a nutshell, with population growth and environment getting a bit more arid in some years, Sumerians had to turn to agriculture. But it does not rain enough for that. They cannot cultivate fields without irrigation. So Sumerians built vast networks of canals to get water from the Tigris and the Euphrates. Organizing agriculture on such a large scale needs a strong management and collective work, maybe to be managed by a central authority that is established in a city, and this would be the start. Afterwards, population growth, food surplus, and opportunities for new jobs would do the rest. This would be one possible model, but it is not entirely satisfying. Ultimately, reasons why Sumerians choose to live in those huge cities remain obscure, but in the end, during the 4th and 3rd millennia BC, Sumer became a land of cities. So here is our land of cities. We have both archaeological and textual evidence for this. Archaeology showed that there were many cities in the southern Mesopotamia plain by this time. Ancient cities are easy to recognize because they are small hills in a very flat landscape. We call them tel, that's the Arabic name. At the start of Archaeology, focus was on the larger sites, but more and more attention is given now to smaller sites. Nowadays, satellite imagery complements well those surveys to recognize smaller settlements in the countryside. Landscape archaeology focuses on ancient river courses and on villages that are not big enough or have not lasted long enough to form a tell. This way, the relationship between the main city and its countryside can be better explored and understood. In the text, Sumerians present themselves as city dwellers, as if it was the ideal way of life. Hundreds of years after the first cities were built, they tell us their own history as a history of cities, According to them, before the flood, kingship was first given to the city Eridu. Then Eridu falls, and kingship goes to another city. That city falls, and kingship goes to another city, and so on. So, of course, such a narrative questions the relationship between those cities, and it looks very competitive. Between the lines, the text tells us that each city wants to rule over the land of Sumer, that is, to control the other cities, and they take turns. The text presents this situation as if all cities respectfully and quietly accept the dominion of another one, knowing that their turn will come one day. In the facts, this means endless wars. However, the text also reflects that Sumerians felt Sumerians. They had this feeling that they were all living in the land of Sumer, which they called Kiengi. But even stronger than this feeling is the one to belong to a city, a community. We could almost compare this to be a football team supporter in our time. Yet, despite the image they show us, that is wonderful to live in a city, city dwellers are the best, there are other components in that society, notably marshes dwellers and shepherds, nomads from the steppe. Being born as a shepherd did not mean that you would not end your life in the city, and vice versa. Sumerian lifestyle could be extremely fluctuant in a lifetime. They had to always adapt to new situations. No monotony in the Sumerian way of life. Let's now turn to this very first city, Uruk, hometown of the great Gilgamesh. Here is how Gilgamesh himself praises the wonders of Uruk in a text, the Gilgamesh epic, that was composed long after the Sumerian king ruled over Uruk. One sar is city, one sar is orchard, one sar is clay pits, half a sar is the temple of Ishtar. Ideally, the city is divided into 3 equal units, plus the temple. City is usually understood as the residential districts, the houses. Orchards speaks by itself, but do not imagine pleasure gardens here. They would be cultivated. The common Sumerian garden is a palm grove with fruit trees and vegetable plots growing under the shadow of the palm tree that protects them from the sun. Clay pits probably corresponds to industrial and craft areas, where Sumerians dug for earth and prepared clay both for architecture and everyday life basic objects. All construction, regular houses as well as monumental buildings are made of mud bricks. All vessels are made with clays, so these spaces is essential in the city. Clay pits may also be used as rubbish pits, also essential in the city plan, but Gilgamesh wouldn't praise for that. Finally, in this ideal city, you cannot miss the temple, the house of the god, and the walls that are one of Uruk wonders. Temple and walls were actually the first monuments everybody saw in Sumerian cities. In the first excavations, archaeologists unearthed temples. Eridu almost looks as if it is nothing else but a temple. This is where the most ancient one was unearthed, a tiny one, as you can see. Eridu then exemplified what is rather common in Mesopotamia. Sumerians keep building new, bigger temples on top of the old ones. In Eridu, they did that during 2000 years. Not a big surprise that Sumer was first described as a mosaic of temple states, with the elusive figure of the king priest or priest kings at their heads. Temples indeed were essential in the life of the city, not only from a religious point of view, but also from an economic one. They owned immense agricultural estates, and as such were not only one of the most important food providers in the city, but also one of the first employers. But there were other forces at work in those cities. The king emerges at the beginning of the 3rd millennium BC. He presents himself as a builder of temples and walls. So this is it. We are at the start of the 3rd millennium BC. Cities cover the land of Sumer. Kings are becoming essential characters. Apart from temples, what else do we find in the Sumerian cities? If you want to find out more, watch the second video. Thank you for your attention.